I'm just not as tall as Bob. That's just not going to happen tonight. Okay, is everybody awake? Everybody awake? Good. All right, well, thank you for hanging in there with us tonight, because we have covered a number of different issues. But this one that we're going to cover right now is important for the work that we're doing, which is the antecedents to the whole discussion of siting. Very important. So the outline is, as you can see, 93, the original siting process, 99, the review, a memorandum of understanding between the county and schools, and then some development review processes. And we have several case studies that we're going to be presenting, but we're holding those until May 13th. So if it helps to know that, please know that we have TJ and a few others coming back to you on the 13th. So from our charge, it's very important, this work that we're doing on siting, because this is going to help inform the 2017 to 2026 CIP. So these criteria that you're going to be developing in the small group and discussing in the large group really are going to make a difference as that document is put together. In anticipation of the work that you're doing, the 93 process that I'm going to be telling you about has actually been withdrawn. But I think what you'll find is that there is a great deal of information in the 93 process that is still relevant for today, but it does need to be updated. So just to put it in a little bit of context, at our next meeting we'll be talking about the facilities and the inventory that staff have been putting together on both the county and school sides. Tonight, the criteria, the past siting process, and the development review, and then the 13th will be the case study. So it's a little bit out of order, and we beg your indulgence on that, but it just seemed like the best way to structure it. So, 93, the first siting process is developed. How many of you lived in Arlington in 93? Remember the discussion about the first multi-program residential center, Barcroft Park? Friday afternoon, hits the papers, firestorm of controversy, remember that? Well, when that multi-program residential center was first announced, Arlington was not building a lot of public facilities. If you recall, the school enrollment had declined in the 70s. TJ Community Center had been built in the middle school with it. It was a school without walls, I believe. But the largest number of community facilities were either schools that had been surplused or buildings that had been around since forever. There was just not a lot happening, and any of us who lived here then knew that. They were pretty all decrepit cinder block buildings. But in 90, the county manager recognized that he was really staring down a significant issue, and that's why that multi-program residential center in Barcroft Park was announced without a lot of fanfare. There were issues in the detention center, the previous detention center. Enrollment in that facility was actually more than double capacity. There were constant issues with the facility, and Arlington actually had to sue the Commonwealth over the issues with state prisoners being in our jail. Secondarily to that, homeless facilities in the county were well oversubscribed, and there were safety issues and service issues. And so the attempt to announce that facility was one born of great need and not a lot of process. So the manager in 1990 chartered a process to create the multi-program residential center, which now resides on Columbia Pike, and to my knowledge has been a good neighbor since the day it opened in 1994. But in the meantime, the county board recognized that more needed to be done on siting and scoping for facilities. And so a group was chartered by Chairman Ellen Bosman and Bill Newman, and the idea was to come together and put a new process in place for when the county was seeking a site or substantially altering the uses already on an existing site. So it was a question of scale that was largely being done, but it was limited to county government facilities, fire stations, and residential facilities for 8 or more people and their resident counselors. Anything smaller than that is exempted by the state. So in June of 93, the county board adopted these principles, and this next slide, this one that's before you now, shows the 6 principles that the working group identified. And if you think about it, these are all very reasonable steps. I'm not going to go into excruciating detail on them, but what I do want to point out on each of them is sort of what I think of as the highlight. Under demonstrating communicating need, what was apparent from the original siting debacle was that people in the community did not understand the pressing need. And so the feeling was that there had to be a better way to make it clear to the community from people in the community, not just advisory bodies, not just county staff, what that need was. So a fact-finding group would be chartered at the initiation of the process to actually look at the question, is there in fact a need, and what is the supporting data? The second item was to share information, and that is so self-evident as to be almost embarrassing that it has to even be written down. But in fact, there is always a challenge to getting the information out to everybody, getting everybody to the same level of information. And the term that was used by that group was information equity. It's got to be fair that every side, the staff side, the public side, has the same information. And it's really challenging because the county frequently receives unsolicited proprietary information, confidential land information, and when you're in the midst of a process, dealing with those kinds of issues is very difficult. Communication and notification. Now remember, this was 1990, 92, 93 when this was being done. The available technologies to communicate and disseminate were snail mail and public announcements and things like that. We have vastly better tools, but at that time it was, talking to Channel 3. Establishing a process. Once that fact-finding group had finished its work, you would create an actual working group that would review the options, weigh criteria, and figure out what the county board should hear about. What were the recommendations to be bringing forward in the way of a process? And one of the things that was made abundantly clear was that use permit process that Bob mentioned, or subdivision process, or whatever it was, none of that was being set aside. But the point was to bring a process proposal forward to the board before anything got moving. Once the process was underway, it was the responsibility of the working group to be open to suggestions of others, those who came late to the party, those who were there from the beginning, whether they were fully formed or not, but to get acceptable sites, to identify them, and to apply a set of criteria that I'll go into in a minute for selecting this site. One of the other challenges that they put forward was ensuring equitable distribution. Now that doesn't work for everything unless the system of delivery is in fact geographically distributed, but this was one of the things that was recommended. Selection of the site was really something that was held to the county board. It was the work of the working group to make these recommendations, but the county board would make the ultimate decision through a public process, public hearings. And then guaranteeing standards and safety. That may seem like a little bit of a what kind of thing, but in point of fact, once a facility is established, the way it maintains good relationships with its neighbors is by virtue of having an advisory body or having a local civic association representative participate in the workings of the organization. If any of you through your civic association deal with a group home, you probably know how that works. And it makes it a huge difference, both in terms of support from the neighborhood and also ironing out issues as they arise. The process recommendations also included making known, as soon as it was known, that a facility was desired. So don't wait just till the CIP is published. Don't wait till a master plan is published. But in point of fact, use all the tools you have to get the word out, to make the base case, to make the best case for the need, so that when the time comes, the community is prepared. Now, I'm not going to go through all these criteria for evaluation, because there are many, but I would urge the siting subcommittee to take a good look at these, because many of these are not only self-explanatory and logical, but I think they are useful guideposts as you do your additional work. The key is really not just the site itself, but the relationship of the site that is recommended to adjacent uses and adjacent activities, how it impacts what is happening around a piece of ground, how it impacts what might have originally been planned for that piece of ground. The example that was given in the original siting memo was if a piece of property is identified as ideal for, let's say, a fire station, well, what was originally planned there? Was it open space? Was it next to a school? Because how are those uses going to work next to each other? Are the adjacencies appropriate, and are they going to be able to coexist both peacefully and successfully? Timely availability is incredibly important. It doesn't matter if a site is available in 10 years, if the need is now, or as is typically the case, yesterday. So some of the lessons learned out of this process as it was adopted, and it was adopted largely as recommended, is that the methodical process laid out didn't anticipate all the situations that might occur. The process only covered county facilities. It didn't cover schools. It was never designed to cover schools. And it didn't count all of the county facilities. It doesn't include libraries or open space or community centers. It doesn't include storage tanks or property yards or any of those kinds of things. The broad definition of stakeholders was extremely important and to some degree a new concept, and I didn't highlight it earlier, but it was not just those who were the immediate neighbors of the site or the immediate users of the proposed facility, but those who might have an interest in that issue from the larger community. So it might be an interest group that supports that particular kind of activity. And there was a huge emphasis on open process. And that word transparent is overused today, but that was, in those days, particularly important. One of the issues is the situation of a lease situation. Leases typically happen quickly. They tend to happen in closed sessions, closed discussions, not out in public. And this is one of the places where there was a difficult rub, as you'll see. So in '99, we did our 3-year review of the siting process. As is often the case, it took 3 years to figure out what all the issues were that needed to be addressed. And so in '99, the county board charged a group of folks to again look at the siting process. And what was highlighted were the areas where the '93 process didn't work. A fast track option for when quick action was required. And an example of that was when property was on the market and likely to be scooped up by somebody else if the county didn't take it. Land or space becomes available, wasn't anticipated, but it's next to a park or it's next to a community facility where expansion might be ideal. Facilities that were identified in approved plans, one of those sector plans that Bob mentioned. How do we deal with that? And then last but not least, adding space or expanding programs. Frequently you would have space come available. It's ideal to expand or the need for the program has grown. If you have to go through a whole siting process, is that really useful for the client base? Is that really useful for the staff? So the committee met, as they often do. There was broad representation of the most affected and most likely to participate commissions, but also the neighborhoods who had been through siting processes. And in '99, they came forward to the county board. There were a series of 11 recommendations that were intended to address the issues that staff had surfaced through the county manager. And as you can see, one of the issues was separating land acquisition from the whole siting process, not dealing with leases in the same way, getting clearer criteria, not covering existing facilities if the expansion was not significant, using a facilitator for the process. So there was a myriad of suggestions that were made, and again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but ultimately what happened was that the staff, the senior staff who were reviewing them with the county manager and the county board did not come to complete consensus on what should happen, and ultimately these recommendations essentially were not adopted. Some pieces were drawn into what staff was doing, but there really was not a readoption, and so the '93 recommendations stood, even though staff agreed with most, but not all of the recommendations. So let me move on to 2011. In 2011, many years later, there had been several years of joint discussions between APS and the county about ways to enhance collaboration. This work had begun as a part of the budget process in 2009, and there were a number of ways, everything from technology to just a variety of sort of back-of-house functions that were identified. But in 2011, it became clear that the various discussions about school facility needs and expansion of space and the county's own needs for space, there might be some synergies that could be created by working together. And so building on the earlier efforts, a memorandum of understanding was created between the county and the schools and adopted by both the school board and the county board that actually said that they would work jointly to identify opportunities for more efficient use of space. It didn't change any underlying processes, but it was an opportunity and an option to move together in a more synergistic way to see if there were places where things could happen. So there were discussions at various points, like Reed School, the county and the schools are there together. Arlington Mill, county and schools discussed it. Ultimately, schools did not stay. But there were a variety of these kinds of opportunities, and I think we are the better for it. But it was limited, and there were constraints that were placed upon it. So other policies were discussed with permanent solutions needing to respect what was articulated in master plans, neighborhood and development plans, and ultimately community input was going to be essential for all of it. The things that were developed in that memorandum were also provided to the TJ working group that you'll be hearing about in more detail at our meeting on the 13th of May. So let's shift gears from process to development review and building level planning committees. And I will turn to Meg for questions as we go forward on the BLPC aspects of it. But there's a number of steps. Again, that needs assessment. What is the need? Define it, be clear about it, figuring out what the right site is, and then going through development review. And so the county has something called the Public Facility Review process. The Building Level Planning Committee is the school's analog, but they actually deal with different things. In some cases, the county and the school board, one or the other, may be both applicants and reviewers, which is real different than a typical development project. And they are both of these groups kick off after a site has been determined. So this is the third step of the process, as that graphic highlighted for you. The BLPC, as it's called for the schools, is appointed by the school board and reviews only school projects. The Public Facilities Review Committee includes commission members and other stakeholders and is actually appointed by the county board. And they review both county facilities and school projects. So let's talk about the BLPC for a minute. And as you can see at the top, the school board identifies a need with their staff. And a process begins whereby staff develops options with community input. The school board provides a direction. Staff analyzes those various options, receives community feedback, and then recommendations based on that feedback move through the staff to the community again for further refinement, and then ultimately the school board makes a decision. So there's a back and forth process of input and engagement, ultimately with the school board making the decision on their process. Now, the schools provided some data on just some of their processes, and this is an example of the kinds of meetings that they held to engage on the secondary seats process, and Meg, again, will be able to answer more detail on those. Same thing with public hearings and school board information sessions. Most recently, and I think several of you have been engaged in this, or perhaps more than several, there's been two ongoing processes, the TJ Working Group and then the Western Roslyn Area Planning Study. And the one is finished and the other will be wrapping up this month. Now this is another example of CIP activity on the part of APS. And you can see there are significant number of individual contacts and public meetings that were held to try and gain input on the school CIP. So the Building Level Planning Committee governance structure, there are two APS policies, and there's some text that follows that you can read on your own, but this is proposed language to refine a little bit of what has been the longstanding policy of the school system. So 50-1 and 50-12, 1.2, excuse me, are the two that are relevant for school facilities. And there are some revisions that are underway. Now, when a building level planning committee is chartered by the school board, you can see the range of participants that are in it. School staff, parents that are nominated by the PTA, members of the civic association in which the school actually is located, others within the attendance zone, someone from the Facility Advisory Council, and then, as appropriate, county boards or commissions like the HALRB. And then there will be a chair that is elected. These next several slides speak to more detail on the building level planning committee, such as the threshold for when they are actually appointed by the school board, which is a construction cost of $10 million or greater, and for which a use permit, the county side, must be obtained. One of the things that the BLPC deals with is the optimal learning environment. The focus is not on the design or the adjacencies in particular. It is making sure that the addition or the new facility provides an optimal learning environment, both indoor and outdoor, for the students. It also takes into account the history of the existing school or the site. The school board provides direction that comes from their adopted CIP based on what the available funds are, the date on which the project needs to be completed, and also articulates kinds of communication and so forth, and they participate in both design and schematic design. I'm going to move on quickly beyond that. There's a variety of resources that are provided. Operations staff, instruction staff, and then county staff participate as appropriate if there's going to be a use permit or if there are particular planning or land use or transportation issues or preservation issues that need to be addressed. Public Facilities Review Committee was established by the County Board in 2007, and as I mentioned, it's not a complete analog to the BLPC, but it is intended to address the fact that the use permit process for a school site in particular happens too late to really effectively address issues and concerns that arise out of that review process. In other words, the use permit is happening at the end, and if the building level planning committee has agreed to a particular access to the site, for example, but there are issues that Arlington's Department of Transportation has with that, they wouldn't get that typically until it was in the use permit. So the PFRC is set up to work in parallel and to avoid those kind of conflicts coming late in the game, because it's both expensive and time-consuming, and it clearly makes it look like one hand doesn't know what the other is doing if those conflicts are arising at the end. Now, the BLPC is not addressing the broader county concerns, as I mentioned. It's really the responsibility of the county to identify those broader policies and plan elements. And really, the focus is on quality land use and transportation planning in civic projects. It's not just schools. The Public Facilities Review Committee also provides an opportunity for advisory commissions to participate, a forum for dialogue on civic design, and promoting compliance with the comprehensive plan. And it really tries to get those issues before they come to the county board for adoption of that use permit, because again, by the time the process is finished at the PFRC and then moves to the Public Facilities Review Committee, you really don't want to have things hanging out there that are huge bones of contention. You want to be starting to tie those issues down. So it is modeled after the Site Plan Review Committee, if you're familiar with that at all, but it is not a subcommittee of the Planning Commission per se. The members are appointed by the county board, and the projects reviewed, as I mentioned, include both use permits and by right facilities, not just site plans. The county board assigns individual projects to them, and there is often a joint work session with the school board for the school projects, or there always is, to make sure that the two boards are in sync. And I think we've already talked about PFRC participation, and there are 3 meetings that occur shortly after the scope of the project has been defined, when conceptual project design is completed, and then when it's submitted for use permit or ultimate approval. So as you can see, there are checkpoints along the way to try and make sure that those big rock policy issues and design issues are addressed before there is a lot of work that has to be redone. It is an attempt to buckle together both county policy and that issue of getting the best school for the children early in the process and consistently across the board. Ultimately, the PFRC makes a recommendation to the county board. And you can see there's quite a number of facilities, not just schools, that have gone through this process since 2007, with Abingdon being currently under review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. I neglected to introduce Susan when she came up. I think most people in the room know Susan Bell, longtime county employee who's been brought back willingly, I think, to be the outside facilitator and the chief staff person for this effort, and we appreciate her, all of her hard work on this. I've got time for a few questions. I let the earlier questions go longer than I should have, so we really don't have a lot of time, but I'll take a few questions. The quiz on these matters doesn't happen until next month, so you don't have to worry about getting quizzed tonight.
Is Bob still here?
Yeah, I'm still here.
I had a question for you, Bob. My question is about, we're talking about the vision of Arlington, and I'm going to use an example for my question. I attended a site plan review for a project. The project doesn't matter, but at the project, at the review in initial stages, county planning announced that the project did not conform with the GLUP for this part of Arlington. However, that they were entertaining a revision to the GLUP, and I know you stated that the GLUP is a policy, not law. But I guess my question would be if you could tell me, you know, as far as a vision for Arlington and a project that right at the outset doesn't conform with the current plan for the neighborhood, who would make the decision regarding revising the GLUP for this project?
Hello? All right. That's a decision that can only be made by the county board. And so I tried to mention that we do have a new process where if a plan is submitted that's not consistent with the general land use plan, then there is a special process that has to happen before the site plan gets considered. It's a committee that's formed with the planning commission, and it's really to evaluate the proposal in light of our plans before we evaluate it in light of our zoning. And so the decision would be a recommendation by the planning commission to the board that this general land use plan amendment is worthy of consideration, and yes, we should begin the process of evaluating the site plan. We've had 2 or 3 of those happen in the last couple of years. One was Bergman's Cleaners. One was a hotel in courthouse area. The others are slipping my mind right now. So only the board can make the decision to change their plans or to change their ordinances. To change the ordinance of the plan, the planning commission must hold a public hearing and must make a recommendation to them.
Could you talk to the timing of in terms of, I know the elements of the comprehensive plan, what is the goal for those being updated, and then what have we actually been able to accomplish? Because I know many of them don't get updated in the timely fashion they should, which can create some issues.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to be able to tell you exactly which ones have been updated when. There is a state code provision that requires that the comprehensive plan be evaluated and amended every 5 years. Now in Arlington, we do that on an ongoing basis. Again, we don't have, as I hopefully tried to express, we don't have a comprehensive plan. We have elements of the comprehensive plan, and so those are almost constantly going through revision. General land use plan we just talked about. The Master Open Spaces plan is about to start, and I think that was done last 6 years ago. You probably 95. Know. Okay, so time flies.
2005.
Master Transportation Plan has recently been done, but I mean one of the things, is, and I won't say it's unique to Arlington, but it's somewhat unique to Arlington how much participation we have and how long it takes some of these things to get done. So what we do, what the planning division does is every 5 years they pull together all of the changes that have been made and package it into called a review of the comprehensive plan. And it's also the time where we have the broad discussion with the board of what are the studies we're going to try to undertake or the plans we're going to try to update in the coming 5 years. But they always do take longer. I mean, we've been trying to get the Master Open Space Plan, up and going for a while. I think there's one of the elements of the Master Transportation Plan is supposed to be looked at again. So I won't say we do it every 5 years. It's probably more every 7 to 10 years is probably the more realistic. And I would say of what I know of Fairfax and Prince William and Loudoun who have comprehensive plans, they don't get them done every 5 years either.
Of course, Bob, it's very useful to have got a reminder of where we were 40 years ago and what kind of principles and directives it took to make us move to where we are today. But what came up in our discussions last time here was that while you seem to imply that the vision that exists today is in a sense to be found implicitly in the GLUP or in the comprehensive plan as such, whereas in all the groups in the discussion last time, I think there was a general sense that people don't sense or know that there is such a thing as a vision for the county. And moreover, if they look back 40 years, they would say that perhaps there are some results of what we have achieved in those 40 years that do not constitute what they want to see continue, namely when we have, there was someone who talked, I thought, rather eloquently about 3 areas of Arlington, the ones along the 2 metro corridors, the not so well-to-do other parts of South Arlington, and the more well-to-do North Arlington that sort of by some of us compared with, well, perhaps more McLean and Fairfax County, and that there was furthermore not much of a unity and mutual understanding and empathy among those 3 parts of Arlington. So that therefore that sort of strengthened a sense of a need for a vision as we go forward rather than and when looking back. And that what we have in the GLUP and the comprehensive plan is not really adequate for that purpose. Could one envisage, when we now have established a model here in the form of this study, although it has its limits and has nothing to do with establishing or recommending a vision for Arlington, could one envisage that in fact Arlington County undertook an exercise whereby the community in this way along that we are going through here really tries to engage the community in determining a vision going forward rather than telling all of us, oh, you can just read a GLUP, that's where the vision is.
Well, I mean, I think those are good points. We haven't revisited it since 1986. And so I wasn't trying to convince you that it was a good vision or a bad vision. It is the development vision that we have. You know, could this group recommend that, you know, as a phase 2, we move into evaluating whether we're heading in the right direction or not? That's, you know, that will be the board's call eventually, since it's the board's group. But, you know, that could be an outcome. But it's, you know, we have not looked at it since 1986. We did have a process to come up with a vision statement, but you know, when people talk to me, that doesn't help them in looking at the kinds of things that you are looking at, and that's why we wanted to do it from a land use perspective. But I mean, you raise good points. I want to do I have a minute to make one correction? I showed on the growth Columbia Pike, and I did not talk about the Columbia Pike plan much. So, you know, because there just wasn't enough time. That would be another presentation, but I didn't want it to be misconstrued. There is growth projected on Columbia Pike. It is consistent with a plan that was adopted by the county board in 2 phases after substantial work with the community, and I just didn't highlight that, but yet was showing growth, and I didn't want to make people think I was trying to hide something there. So.
Okay, I've got time for a couple of more. I'm going to start with Hans. I've got Alan, Tanya, and that's it.
I'll pass.
Okay, Alan?
And I'll just ask it, and maybe we can come back to it next time.
Okay, pose it.
Okay, so I'll pose it, which is one that as the nature of the needs have changed to a lot more of a school-based needs in the community, does that imply that we should also look at changing these processes between the schools and the county and maybe perhaps merging them? Or so I just wanted to put that out there as a question. And then the second one was around the transportation aspect, particularly around schools and school siting. And maybe this is a question for schools as to when when that comes into the picture, and I just want a little more clarification, I guess, on that point.
Okay. We'll take up the second one at the next meeting. First one, I think I'm going to ask the demographic subcommittee to deal with. Tanya?
I'm Tanya Talento. I don't know if I introduced myself last time. So the concern that I have is, it sounds like the GLUP is based on a plan from the 70s that we've modified not a lot. Is that correct? I just want to make sure that I understand that before I ask my question or make my statement.
I would say we don't modify it a lot. We look at it quite often. Every time we do a sector plan, every time we do a small area plan, we look at it and evaluate whether it should be changed. I would say we don't modify it too often. That piece is correct.
The reason I mention that is because in the 70s, segregation was fairly prominent in Arlington, and I imagine that minorities and low income were not represented in the people making the GLUP. And maybe that's why we're having a lot of conflicts with the GLUP and current projects and visions. And maybe conflicts is the wrong word, but just things that aren't quite matching up. So I just want to put that out there because I think that needs to kind of be addressed as we move forward, making facility siting recommendations, especially if GLUP is a prominent factor in how we manage our zoning and site plans. And I just think that's something that should be said.
I didn't think there was anything else.
I mean, it certainly is a different county than it was in the 1970s. Since I was involved in the 1970s, it's not that different. But yeah, it's the demographic profile of the county is very different than it was in the 1970s. I had one other question over here, right?
I know we're all tired. I have an economic development sort of piece on this. A lot of the planning stuff that Bob talked about may not be, it may not work the same given the economic development discussion we had. And I think that goes into how we pay for all the facilities, I think. And then I'm glad you mentioned the Columbia Pike Plan because it's a pretty interesting approach to planning. It's in a bit of a spot right now because of the transportation issue, but that's another long-term issue with facilities as well as development.
That's actually a very good segue into the last point I've got for everybody. Get your calendars out, if you would, and just let me tell everyone whether or not you're on the various subcommittees that I'm going to talk about, when those subcommittees are meeting. The Economic Subcommittee, which I'm going to chair, and the Demographic Subcommittee, which Ginger is chairing, are both meeting next Tuesday night, the 14th of April, in the evening at Courthouse Plaza. And the specifics are on the website, so in addition to writing it down now, you can always look it up on the website. The Facilities Subcommittee and the Siting Subcommittee. Facilities Subcommittee is going to meet for the first time on the 27th of April. And at least a tentative date for the Siting Subcommittee is the 5th of May. That's not set yet, but that's the tentative date right now. Our next meeting as a full group, as you saw on the slide before, is the 22nd of this month, April. And at that meeting, we're going to take up the last of the informational pieces that we need in order to assemble all of the data and information that we need to do our jobs. We started with financial resources. We've spent a couple of meetings on demographics. We've gotten into siting issues and facility issues for the first time tonight. Virtually all of the next meeting is going to be talking about facility issues. What do we have? What do the various departments think they're going to need based on the demographics that they see, and how do they go about figuring that out? That'll be the beginning of that discussion. The facilities subcommittee, then armed with that, will have its first meeting, and the siting subcommittee have its first meeting after that. Then in the next meeting, which is the 27th of May, you recall you got emails saying, are you more available right before Memorial Day or right after Memorial Day? Well, more people are available on the 27th than were available on the 20th, so that's the day we've settled upon. And again, all of this is on the website, so you don't have to rely on your notes for tonight. Jen, did I screw something up? True. I'm told there's a meeting on May 13th as well, but again, I appreciate your indulgence tonight. I know it's been a lot of stuff, but it's essential information we need to get out and on the table, get people thinking about it, and the 4 subcommittees are now going to begin their work armed with the information that they've gotten, and the study group as a whole will continue participating and listening. You're going to get reports back from the subcommittees, comment on those, send them back to do further work. So we begin the iterative process with the 4 subcommittees as they do their tasks. Thank you again. Appreciate your indulgence tonight.